So let's work on that feedback area now. And for this, below this higher or lower text which I have here, I want to output two primary buttons using my own custom built button. One button that shows a plus and one button that shows a minus. Now for this, of course, you must make sure that primary button is being imported in this file. So this import must be added. And then we can add a plus and a minus button. We will later replace plus and minus with better looking icons, but for the moment, these default characters will do. Now I actually want to make sure that these two buttons are next to each other in a row below this text here. And therefore I'll wrap them in an extra view, just as we did it a little bit earlier, so that I can then ensure that this view, which holds the buttons, positions its children in a row, whereas this view, which holds the text and then the view with the buttons, positions these elements in a column below each other. And I will add the styling code for creating that layout later, but that's the general structure I'd like to have. Well, and now we can add the onPress prop to both buttons, and then make sure that we have some function we can call that will derive a new random number. And for this, I will add a new function here, the nextGuessHandler function, and the job of this function is to derive such a new number. For this, we need to know if that new number that should be guessed should be higher or lower. Now we could write two separate functions, where then one function is bound to this first button and the other function is bound to the second button. But here I will simply use one function, which takes a parameter, which could be called a direction, which then could be a string that is either lower if the new number should be lower than the previous number, or greater if it should be greater. So that is what direction should hold actually. And since I will be the one calling that function, it's my responsibility to pass in either lower or greater as values. And then inside of nextGuessHandler, we can check if direction is lower, which means we want to now generate a lower number, or, well, if it's higher. Now for that, to derive that number, we of course want to call our random number generation function again. So generate random between, we want to call that again. But now we need new boundaries. And if we know that the new number should be lower than the previous number, we know that our minimum boundary was okay, but the max boundary needs to be adjusted because it was too high. Otherwise, the new number wouldn't have to be lower. So my min should stay the previous minimum number, but how do we know what the previous minimum was? Initially it's 1, but of course that could change over time. If we had to guess a higher number at some point, the minimum is no longer 1. So both the min and the max boundaries are actually dynamic, and they're only 1 and 100 initially. Now what we can do for this is we can add extra variables which we manage outside of the component function, so that the variables won't change just because the component is re-evaluated. And here I'll have my min boundary, which initially is 1, and I have my max boundary, which initially is 100. And then we could use the min boundary here and the max boundary as initial values, but we can also change these variables as soon as we have to. So here, for example, when we know that we need to guess lower, we know that our new max boundary actually should be the current guess. Because we know the current guess was too high, so it makes no sense to guess a number even bigger. Because if we have to guess lower, we know that the current guess was too big, otherwise we wouldn't have to guess lower. And therefore we know that the current guess is definitely the upper boundary. Actually, it's the current guess minus 1 even, because if the current guess would have been the right number, we would have won. So it has to be the current guess minus 1. That's our new max boundary. On the other hand, since the max boundary is excluded here when calling generate random between, we should not deduct minus 1, because if we do so, we actually exclude a number that could be the valid guess. So setting max boundary to current guess is fine. It will be our current guess, which then will automatically be excluded by generate random between because of how this function works. Now the min boundary has not changed here when we need to guess lower. So now we generate a random number between the min boundary, the max boundary, which we did update. And when it comes to excluding a number here, we actually want to exclude the current guess. It makes no sense to guess the same number again, though it would be excluded anyways here, since it is our new max boundary, which, as mentioned before, is excluded anyways because of how this function is written. Nonetheless, we exclude the current guess here, and with that we should guess a new lower number. So here we have the new random number that's being guessed, which should be lower than the previous one. Now else, if the direction is not lower, we know that we need to guess a higher number. So we need to generate our random number as before, but now we need to adjust the min boundary instead of the max boundary. And the new min boundary here in this case should of course also be our current guess, but the current guess plus 1. The min boundary, unlike the max boundary, is included in the set of possible results, and therefore we have to add plus 1 so that we don't guess the same min boundary again. We would exclude it also because current guess is excluded, but still, this is an adjustment we can make here. This exclude parameter mostly exists for the initial guess. For the other guesses we don't really need it, so therefore here setting this to the current guess each time is perfectly fine. And of course, you will notice that this random number calculation, this line of code, is exactly the same, so we can move this out of the if-else statement and remove it in the other branch here, and just have it once and just adjust the boundaries inside this if-else statement. So now we have this new random number here, and this is now the new random number we want to use as a new state for the guess. So now we can call the setCurrentGuess state updating function and set this equal to the new random number. Now with that, this should be updated, and we just need to bind this function to these buttons now. And for this, of course, we want to point at the nextGuessHandler function on both buttons, but we need to pre-configure this function because this function wants a parameter, the direction. And you learned that you can pre-configure a function like this that will be called by someone else, like in this case the button and therefore React Native in the end, by using the bind method on that function. This allows you to pre-configure the parameter value that will be used in a future function execution. Now the first value of bind actually sets the this value, so it sets the value to which the this keyword would refer in this function. And since we're not using this keyword here, this does not matter at all, so I will just set it to this. But the second value is then the first parameter received by that function. And here that should be a string with the content lower, because that's one of the two string values we want, because that's one of the values we're checking for. We're actually not checking for the other value in any place at this time, but still here I will set this to greater nonetheless. And actually now it's wrong. This should be the minus button. This should be the plus button. So update these characters so that they fit the way we call this function. Okay, with all of that, we added those buttons, we added this functionality. Let's see whether it works. We got the buttons here, and if I click a plus, indeed, we get a higher number. If I click a plus again, we get an even higher number. And if I click the minus, we get lower numbers. However, only up to this point, and now the app froze here. Let's try this again. Yeah, at some point, it freezes with a maximum call stack size exceeded error. So it looks like we're somehow entering an infinite loop in some place. And that causes the app to crash. Now, where does this happen? Now, to understand why this happens, let's actually add a console log statement to this nextGuessHandler, and let's log the min and max boundaries. Because there is a reason why this is happening. If we add this and we force a reload, let's say I have the number 31. Now I tell the computer that the number should be smaller than 71, smaller than 63. And if we have a look at the log, we see that indeed we're logging the min boundary, which never changed. And we have our max boundary, which makes sense. And we have no problem right now. Now, if I now give the computer a wrong hint, for example, like this, then we see that the min boundary is now 46 and the max boundary is 63. At this point, the computer has no chance of guessing the right number, which was 31, but that's not even the main problem. The main problem is that if I now say lower again and lower and now higher, at some point we narrow down this area to an area where no guesses can be made anymore. At the moment it's still possible, but if I decrease this again, and I decrease this again, now we get to a range where if I press this again, we actually have a range that is no range anymore. Now a random number between 48 and 48 would have to be guessed, and that number can never be found, and therefore we enter an infinite loop. Because this is then also always equal to our latest guess, which was 48, and therefore we always make it into this recursive function here, guessing more numbers, never getting out of that. So actually the problem is that we can make contradicting indications to the computer. And besides entering this infinite loop, this would be a problem anyways, because we should play fair. We should let the phone know if the guess was too high or too low, and we should not be able to say, you need to guess higher, if actually you need to guess lower. Therefore, we should add another check here at the beginning of next guess handler, and there we should check if the direction is lower, and at the same time, the current guess that was made is smaller than the choice made by the user, than the user number, which we get through props. Because if the current guess is smaller, and we're saying that you need to guess lower, then we are lying. Because you already guessed lower than the user number, so telling you that you need to guess even lower is a lie. The same would be true for the opposite if I copy this and combine it with an OR statement, because that would also be a problem. If we say the direction is greater, but the current guess is actually greater than the user number, then we're also misleading the phone into a wrong direction. And this is what causes the infinite loop in the end. So now I'll group this together in parentheses. And now with this extra if check added, if we return here and not calculate a new number in this case, we won't have this infinite loop anymore. Of course, I don't just want to return silently, instead I want to let the user know that he or she lied. And we could do this by throwing an alert. So by using this built-in alert API again, which we already used before, we can use this to now show a short alert message here by calling alert and saying, don't lie, you know that this is wrong. And then we can add a button here with a text of sorry, for example, and the style of this button could be cancel. You can, of course, configure this however you want. We don't need to add an on-press handler here, because I don't want to do anything when this button is clicked. Instead, I just want to close the dialog, which will happen automatically, and then return. I'm just warning the user that an incorrect indication was given. Now, one thing that's missing here, though, and that was already missing before, to be honest, is the user number. The user number is received as a prop, and we're using it to calculate the initial random number, but actually I forgot to pass this number into this component. So all the time we didn't take it into account. Therefore, what we should do here is we should go back to app.js, where we manage this number with state, and we should of course pass it into this game screen as soon as the game started. So here I'll set the user number prop and set this equal to the user number state that we're managing here in the app component, so that this picked number is exposed to the game screen. We should have done this before. I did it now to make sure that this number really ends up there. Now, with that done, if we reload everything, what we'll have now is that if I enter a number and now I have a guess that's too high, the number is too big, if I tell the phone that it needs to guess even higher, a bigger number, I get this alert. So now, actually this would have been the right number, we just don't have any exit condition yet, but now I get this warning. And now with that, we get this alert whenever we mislead the computer. So that's another huge step forward, and we're getting closer to implementing this final game logic that we need.